There is a number in America so large it has lost all connection to reality. It's moving past $35 trillion and accelerating toward $38 trillion. If you stack that much money in $1 bills, it would stretch farther than the distance astronauts have ever traveled. And somehow, we were told this didn't matter. But in 2024, the math changed. We have crossed into a new era of fiscal reality where the debt is no longer just a line on a spreadsheet. It behaves more like a predator that has finally caught up with its target. It is beginning to feed on the federal budget in real time. For the first time in the history of the United States, the federal government is spending more on interest payments than on national defense. Think about that. The country is now sending more money to holders of old bonds than it is to equip the U.S. military in the present. The government is also spending more on interest than on the entire Medicaid program. The interest bill alone is approaching $1 trillion per year. That is not just a line item. That is a structural shift. This is the beginning of what economists call a debt spiral. In a normal household, if you have too much debt, you cut spending. You stop eating out. You cancel Netflix. You downgrade the car. You adjust your lifestyle until the numbers work again. But a government is not a household. A huge share of the U.S. government's budget is classified as mandatory spending, programs like Social Security and Medicare. These are legal promises made to an aging population. Breaking them is not just unpopular, it is nearly impossible politically. So the government cannot simply decide to cut spending in the way a family can. Instead, when it needs to pay interest on old debt, it issues new debt. It's like opening a new credit card to make the minimum payment on your existing credit cards. This pushes the total higher, which increases next year's interest bill, which requires even more borrowing, which increases the debt again. It is a mathematical feedback loop that naturally leads to exponential growth. And here is the uncomfortable part. At this scale, there is no painless conventional way out. Historically, there are only 3 traditional ways to reduce a sovereign debt burden of this magnitude. 2 of them are politically impossible in the United States today. The third is already happening. The first option is austerity, massive tax hikes, severe spending cuts. To truly balance the budget and start paying down the debt, the government would have to roughly double income taxes or dramatically reduce the size of the U.S. military. Neither of those is going to happen. Any politician who openly proposes cutting Social Security checks by 30% is ending their career on the spot. Any president who suggests a 70% income tax rate is almost guaranteed to lose in a landslide. The American economy has become deeply dependent on government spending. Pull the plug all at once and you don't get a soft landing. You get something that would feel very much like another Great Depression. So austerity in any meaningful form is off the table. The second option is default. The government could step up to the podium one day and say, "We're not paying." That's what countries like Argentina and Russia have done in the past. But the United States is not just another country with a large debt. It is the issuer of the global reserve currency. The entire world financial system, every major bank, every pension fund, every large insurance company, every international trade contract is built on the assumption that U.S. Treasury bonds are risk-free. If the United States openly defaulted, the global banking system would experience an immediate freeze. International trade could stall, payment networks could fail, credit cards and digital transactions could be disrupted worldwide. It would not look like a localized crisis. It would look like a system-wide breakdown. So explicit default is also effectively off the table. That leaves only one option, the option that every major empire in history, from Rome to Weimar Germany to post-war Britain, eventually chose. It is the path of least resistance, sometimes called the soft default. You don't refuse to pay the debt, you pay every dollar of it, but you pay it back in currency that is worth significantly less than when you borrowed it. The difference is created quietly through the printing press and the banking system. This is not a conspiracy theory. It is best described as the unofficial, but very real, policy of the modern state. It has a technical name: financial repression, a set of tools designed to keep interest rates on government debt below the rate of inflation, transferring real wealth from savers to the issuer of the currency. Let's do the basic math the way your opponent never wants to put it on screen. If the government owes $30 trillion and inflation runs at 5%, the real value of that debt shrinks by 5% per year. In purchasing power terms, the government has just erased $1.5 trillion of its obligations in a single year, without passing a new tax and without cutting a single program. Bondholders get every dollar they were promised, but those dollars now buy fewer groceries, fewer cars, fewer homes. The loss is often explained away as supply chain issues or temporary inflation. The label changes. The mechanism does not. We move into an era where the money printer is effectively fused to the government budget. That is the hidden crisis. It is not a sudden crash, it is a slow boil. The 38 trillion number will keep going up. It will reach 40 trillion, then 50 trillion. At the same time, the value of each individual dollar will keep slipping. The government is making a calculated bet that it can inflate away the debt faster than markets can fully react. It is a dangerous balancing act. If inflation is pushed too low, the debt burden grows heavier and heavier in real terms. If inflation runs too high, there is a risk of something closer to runaway inflation, where confidence in the currency itself starts to weaken. Policymakers are trying to thread the needle, aiming to hold inflation around 4 to 5% for a decade or more. On paper, that sounds manageable. In reality, the compound effect is severe. At 5% inflation, the purchasing power of your savings is cut in half in about 14 years. That is effectively the quiet plan, to reduce the real weight of the national debt by roughly half, and at the same time reduce the real value of the average person's savings by the mid-2000s and 30s. To understand how this works in detail, you don't need a crystal ball. You need a history book. We are not in completely uncharted territory. We are replaying an economic playbook the United States has used before. In 1945, at the end of World War II, the U.S. debt-to-GDP ratio reached about 119%. The government did not pay that down by running huge surpluses and taxing everyone more heavily. It reduced the burden through negative real interest rates. For roughly a decade, the Federal Reserve held interest rates at around 2.5%, while inflation averaged over 6%. Each year, bondholders lost about 3.5% of their purchasing power in real terms. That was not an accident. It was a deliberate policy choice, a transfer of wealth from savers to the state. The verdict from this phase is simple. The U.S. government is not planning to default openly. It is planning to let inflation and negative real interest rates do the work. It will aim to keep nominal interest rates below real inflation for years. This is what some call the silent erasure. If you keep your money in a savings account earning 4% while real inflation is closer to 8%, you are effectively paying off the national debt. You are the donor class. The only real way to opt out of that equation is to own assets that cannot be created at will. Scarce assets, productive businesses, real estate with real demand, and this process does not hit everyone equally. In fact, it is one of the primary engines of the rising inequality that is pulling the United States apart. To understand why, we go back to an 18th century French economist named Richard Cantillon. He observed that where new money enters the economy matters just as much as how much money is created. This is now known as the Cantillon effect. There's a family in the United States that did everything right, not in a dramatic way, just quietly right. They worked steady jobs. They avoided unnecessary debt. Every month, part of their paycheck went into savings. Another part went into a 401k. Some of it went into government bonds because they were told those were safe. Responsible choices, sensible planning. On paper, they were doing well. Their savings earned around 4%. Their retirement balance slowly grew. Their finances looked healthy. Anyone reviewing their situation would say they were playing by the rules. But without any sudden shock, something began to change. Groceries cost a little more. Rent increased faster than their salaries. Insurance premiums climbed. The same vacation they took a few years earlier now cost noticeably more, even though nothing about it had improved. They weren't alarmed. Inflation on the news was only 3 to 4%. Experts said it was temporary, so they kept saving, they kept trusting. Over time, a quiet realization set in. Their money was growing in numbers, but shrinking in reality. They weren't falling behind because they made mistakes. They were falling behind while doing everything they were told was right. No one raised their taxes, no one sent a bill, no one explained what was happening. The loss didn't feel dramatic, it felt slow, almost invisible. Their money wasn't unsafe, it was just becoming less powerful with each passing year. And by the time they fully understood that, the rules of the game had already changed. The wealthy received the new money before inflation. The poor and the middle class receive it after inflation. That is why, since 2008, we have seen what many call a K-shaped economy. The asset-owning class, roughly the top 10%, has watched its wealth explode as central bank liquidity pushed up the prices of stocks and homes. The wage-earning class, roughly the bottom 90%, has watched purchasing power shrink as wages lag behind the rising cost of rent, food, and basic services. In practical terms, the national debt is being reduced in part by gradually pressuring the American middle class. This reality forces a fundamental rethink of what saving even means. For the last 40 years, the standard advice sounded simple and wise. Work hard, save 10% of your income, put it in the bank, and buy government bonds. This became the classic 60-40 portfolio, 60% in stocks, 40% in bonds, designed for a world where money largely held its value and government debt was considered genuinely safe. In a world of fiscal dominance, that advice can become financially dangerous. If you save in cash, you are almost guaranteed to lose purchasing power. If you buy long-term government bonds, you may be guaranteed to lose real value over time. We are entering an era of what some call forced speculation. To simply preserve your wealth, you are pushed into taking more risk, buying stocks, real estate, or even crypto, not necessarily to get rich, but to outrun the downward pull of currency devaluation. If the dollar becomes primarily digital at the core, if most balances exist directly under the umbrella of the central bank, the Federal Reserve and the government gain far more precise tools. They could, in principle, apply negative interest rates directly to digital balances, deducting, for example, 1% from your account every month if the goal is to accelerate spending. They could issue stimulus payments that expire automatically after 30 days, if not spent, ensuring the money circulates immediately instead of being saved. This is not pure science fiction. Versions of this are already being tested in China with the digital yuan. A fully implemented digital dollar would be the ultimate tool for managing the debt economy. It would allow the state to fine-tune the velocity of money, reward certain behaviors, and discourage others with code. The transition to a mostly cashless society is not primarily about convenience. It is about control over how, when, and where money moves, and making sure there is no easy escape valve when the great wealth transfer accelerates. So, where does that leave us? In practical terms, the United States is not preparing for a loud, dramatic default where it walks away from its obligations in a single day. It is already in the process of a quieter, gradual form of adjustment. You could call it a slow administrative default in real terms. The $38 trillion on the screen will almost certainly never be repaid in full in today's purchasing power. The burden will be reduced over time by inflation, by negative real interest rates, by policies that gently favor borrowers over savers, and by financial structures that keep the system funded even when it no longer feels fair. The likely winners in this environment will be those who own scarce, productive, or non-printable assets, real estate with real demand, Resilient businesses, gold, Bitcoin, intellectual property, things that cannot simply be created by policy. The likely losers will be those who rely entirely on the currency and the old institutions, on fixed incomes, on cash savings, on bonds that promise a yield lower than inflation. The traditional American dream, work hard, save steadily, and let compound interest slowly lift you to security, is being rewritten. We are now in a different game, the game of asset survival. History rarely repeats itself in exactly the same way, but when you study the pattern, the debt, the inflation, the regulations, the digital tools, it all starts to feel very, very familiar.